Ladies, gentlemen, am I often forgotten, but certainly not by me, Pernix Quivers. Welcome to the channel and welcome to another guide. In this guide, we're going to be revisiting Bow of the Last Guardian and how to DPS with it. A little while ago, there was an update to Piercing Shot, Rack, and Slice to all give them different effects and how they worked and whatnot. Quick disclaimer before we get into this guide, I am not going to be covering poison methods in this one. This is going to be strictly for either a crit style build or maybe a more budget-friendly version of just normal range DPS. You could use the same ideas here, but poison is kind of its own entity, and it looks like it might be getting some type of nerf. Jagex is aware of how OP it is, so I personally will not be covering poison method in this video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this guide. Now in this video, I'm going to have time codes. Feel free to use those for the parts that you need. But real quickly, I'm just going to go over ability prioritization, what abilities are decent, which ones aren't to use, for those who just got a Bow of the Last Guardian and want to learn a little bit more about the ability usage with range. Well, let's go ahead and get into it, starting with basic abilities. So as mentioned earlier, Piercing Shot got an update. It is now 2 hits that add up to 110% damage, but if a target is bound or stunned, you get an additional 30%, which overall makes it a much stronger ability than it once was, which was a 94% that only did 1 hit, so it got a little bit of a damage buff, and it makes building stacks with the BOLG a lot easier. Greater Dazing Shot is a pretty strong basic. It's one that I press pretty much every third ability unless I'm doing a specific rotation. It has its own effect where it puts stacks onto a target, and once it's up to 10, you can use an ability called Salt the Wound, and you will deal damage based on the number of stacks you have built up. And it also has its own bleed effect. You could think of this like as parasite stacks, but you build it up every single ability you do. And if you want to make this effect work really well, you can do something like splintering arrow swapping, although I think it's a little bit extreme, but it's certainly something you can do to make this ability even stronger. The splintering arrow effect basically just gives you a bigger window of time for you to upkeep stacks with this ability, and I believe it makes the stacks go up to 13 instead of 10, thus giving you some bigger puncture bleeds. So overall it is worthwhile, or if you're just looking for a pretty cheap arrow that has no accuracy penalty like full arrows do, then it's something you can consider. Binding Shot is a pretty good basic. It stuns for only 2 game ticks, but it binds for the same length of time that an Ice Barrage does, being 9.6 seconds. And an ability like this makes Piercing Shot a bit stronger, so it is kind of worthwhile to piggyback off of the two. So it's kind of worthwhile to let the two kind of synergize together. Or if you want to keep a target bound for a while, this is how you do it with range. Frag Shot and Corruption Shot are the 2 bleeds you have with range that are basics. Frag Shot works in the same method that Combust does for magic, where you do it has a certain amount of damage for its base bleed, but if you move the target, then it will double the bleed damage, so it's a pretty strong ability on any target that's movable. Or if you wanted to go super ridiculous on the range swaps meta, you could buy a Hex Hunter bow. You could bring it to any boss that is Hex Hunter susceptible and use that as a swap for boosting Frag Shot. And these perks are susceptible to lunging, however the move damage is only 1.5x instead of 2, and I don't think lunging 4 makes it worthwhile. You would only use something like that when dealing with static targets that can't be moved, like these dummies, or some of the bosses in Elite Dungeons, or other trash mobs, or pyres, or spires. There's a lot of different mobs that are static in the game once you start to think about it, so lunging swaps technically can be worthwhile, but they're usually pretty overkill and not necessary. Overall, it's a pretty strong basic, and I do use it. It also synergizes well with the ECB EoF. I'll get into the EoFs and arrows a little bit later on, and how they specifically work, but bleeds do work well with the ECB spec. Corrupt Shot is a very strong basic ability. In fact, I believe it is one of the strongest, if not the strongest, just to how much damage it does over time, and it has an AoE effect, so should you need to kill a bunch of trash mobs or something, this is a strong ability. Snipe is a very strong basic ability, however it takes 4 ticks to shoot, so When using it in rotations, it doesn't feel the strongest, however, it is still worthwhile as a basic ability to use. And we get to the last ability, Gricko, which is the strongest ability in game. Gricko is probably one of the strongest basics in game. It is right up there with G-Conk, and that is because if you're attacking a single target, all of the hits that normally would have gone out to other targets in an AoE fashion just end up piling themselves right up on the single target. So if you're just attacking a single target and you have Karoming 4 on your bow, then you will get 7 hits out of Gricko, which is very strong for building any sort of stacks or doing anything with the special attack. And if you have the Bow of the Last Guardian spec active, that means you're getting 8 hits out of the Gricko. You should pretty much be using this ability as much as possible. Now, as far as threshold abilities, there are 3 that I mainly use and 1 that I kind of use. Snapshot is a staple inside of my rotations. I try to get 2 off per death swiftness. Overall, it is a very strong and easy to use threshold. Rapid Fire is a channeled ability. However, if you have Fleeting Boots on, you can run around to your heart's content with this ability. Plus, it gives an accuracy buff. The Fleeting Boots do, that is. And overall, this is very helpful for building up things like Death Spore stacks and also just getting out crits in general. It's also very good for ECB EoF. Overall, 10 out of 10 ability. Shadow Tendrils is a very strong one. However, if you're not careful, it can definitely take you out in combat because it'll hit you for like 4 to 5k damage. However, it is going to pretty much max out and it's a guaranteed crit. So inside of Death Swift rotations, it is highly worthwhile. But with the cooldown that it has of 45 seconds, you're pretty much only going to be using this inside of Death Swiftness. The last threshold here on the bar is Tight Bindings, and it's a good threshold. You can definitely weave it into some certain things, but it's definitely more advisable to use these 3 or EoFs before you use Tight Binding. It's a strong threshold, but it's not the strongest by any means. Last but certainly not least, we have the ultimates. There are 3 on my bar here. Death Swiftness or Greater Death Swiftness, either one are going to work just fine. It basically lasts 30 to 38 seconds depending on which setup you have with it, and gives you 50% damage increase for that duration. Now, Greater Death Swift is more so a quality of life update rather than an actual upgrade. Yes, you do get the bleed effect and you don't have to planted feet swap with it, but to me that's more so quality of life rather than actually getting a proper DPS increase out of it. However, it is your strongest ultimate and you should be pretty much using it as much as possible. Deadshot is a strong ultimate and it gets buffed by the Zuck Cape. It's quite underrated in my opinion, and it is probably the best ability to use with ECB specking. You've probably seen some videos of people doing solo necks and Deadshot with ECB spec and maybe a couple other bleeds, and it pretty much ticks necks out really fast. However, I don't use it inside of DS too much, at least in the build that we're going to be talking about today, which is a crit build. I mostly use this outside of Death Swiftness, or if I'm chinning things down and I have a big group of mobs that I all want to die that have relatively high HP, I will chin Deadshot all the time, and it's very strong. Now, the last ultimate on the bar here, or the last ability on the bar I should say, is Incendiary Shot. Incend is basically like Tsunami and Meteor Strike, where once the hit goes into effect, meaning you see the hit on the target that you planted it on, it will give you a 30-second duration where each time you crit, you gain 10% adrenaline. Now, it does cost 100% adrenaline, but that is where something like Death Spore arrows come into play, thus allowing you to get out a lot of crit damage and a lot of damage overall during an ultimate rotation. And it is also technically an AoE, so you can put this into a group of mobs that are all standing next to each other, and it will hit all of them in a 3x3 area. So I went ahead and pulled out every single Pernix quiver that I own just to talk about all the different arrows. Demon Bane and Dragon Bane, they are extremely strong on the targets that they work for, but obviously they only work on specific targets respectively. They give a 30% damage increase and 20% accuracy buff to any target that they are susceptible to. So I pretty much only use Dragon Bane through ED2. I might bring Demon Bane sometimes to ED3, or if I'm doing range Zami, the demons that spawn on some of the specs, I will use there. But other than that, these are niche arrows. However, if they do work on a target, definitely bring them. Thick arrows are very strong in a poison method. However, as mentioned before, I'm not going over poison method rotations today. I'm waiting to see what happens with potential nerfs and whatnot. However, in current PVM, poison method is very strong, and there are plenty of videos out there. I think I even have a couple videos on Carapac poison, so feel free to check those out. But basically, you build these up to 400 stacks. It is 2 stacks per ability hit, and poison damage goes through the roof. Death Spore arrows I do use quite often. Basically, how they work is you get 5 crits to build up 5 stacks, and then the next ability you use, no matter what it is, if it costs adrenaline, it costs adrenaline no more. And this works on ultimates, so I will build up stacks right before I'm about to do a Death Swift rotation, and then once I'm at 5, you'll see a 10-second timer pop up in your buff bar, meaning you have 10 seconds to press an ability and take advantage of its effects, where you would hit DS and then you'll stay at 100% adrenaline, and then I use that adrenaline to go ahead and press Incendiary Shot afterward. Overall, I highly recommend these arrows if you're doing anything on some sort of a crit build. However, crit builds can be kind of expensive because of Grim Pages, but hey, if you're able to solo Solak, you get free Grim Pages anyway, so more damage the better. When arrows, as far as I know, are only really used at Telos and Virago because of accuracy concerns. They seem to be the go-to arrow for people who really need accuracy at a boss and they can't get away with using full arrows. And they do have a damage effect where you build up stacks with basic abilities, and then a threshold will trigger that effect to then give you more damage on your thresholds. It's an interesting concept, but I won't lie, I've read through the tooltip about 25 to 30 times, and I've looked at other stuff on it. I've had other people try and explain it to me, and when arrows are simply just pretty freaking confusing. Overall, I would only really use these at the aforementioned places like Telos because it's in the rotations itself on PvMe, or at Virago if you need the accuracy. Blackstone arrows just give a defense reduction effect on the target. They kind of work in the same vein of a stat hammer, however you have to build up 15 stacks for them to be fully effective, but the 15 stacks will be there through pretty much any phase transition until the target is dead, and there is no real amount of time that they can only go for. They'll pretty much be there until the target dies. The only place I've ever really used these is at Virago, and I also have seen use at Telos for them. In some more budget setups, I've seen them used at Next Solo. Overall, they're a very strong arrow. It's just kind of limited on their use case. Splintering arrows are the arrows that I mentioned before that buff up Greater Dazing Shot really nicely. I know that they're pretty decent as a swap arrow, however, not too many people use them. I could see this maybe used with a poison setup or some real tryhards that really want to eke out the most damage possible. I could see using these as a switch, but overall they really don't get too much use. Full arrows are kind of the bread and butter of most rangers and their arsenal. This is the arrow that's going to be used the most often because it is just a free 15% damage buff anywhere you go. However, there is a 10% accuracy penalty, so you have to be careful about where you go with these, but pretty much anywhere, at least any of the modern bosses, they're going to work just fine. Now, as far as EoFs are concerned, SGB is pretty self-explanatory. You want 2 of these out in a DS. That's a very strong thing. As long as the target is susceptible to it, you pretty much need a target with a 3x3 hitbox or bigger, or else the 30% adrenaline really isn't worth the 1 arrow that's guaranteed, and you're not going to get too many arrows on anything that's a 2x2 or a 1x1 otherwise. Dark Bow on a full-on crit build is going to be the bread and butter of your DS rotations. It is very strong, and with the Bow of the Last Guardian effect, you can have it do a 3rd hit, which is basically anywhere from 30 to 45k damage in a single game tick. Overall, extremely strong. ECB is the 3rd EoF here that I have, and it is very, very strong. However, there is kind of a law of diminishing return when using ECB, just because I believe it is still susceptible to the same Soul Split nerfs that happened a long time ago. Now, Soul Split works under a sort of capped method where for the first amount of HP that you heal, you'll get pretty much all the health. However, the bigger the hit is, the more diminishing returns you get on those heals. It's why when you hit like a 1k, you'll see a full 100 health show up, for example, but if you hit like a 15k, you might only see like 1.8 2k or 1.1k or sometimes only like 900 HP come back. There is a built-in law of diminishing return with Soul Split, and ECB is obviously going to be affected by that because all ECB does is redirects that healing as an input to just a output as damage on the target. So by nature with ECB, things that are naturally going to work better are things like bleeds and rapid fire because they do lower damage per hit, but they're still good damage per minute, and it allows you to get out technically better damage when using this special attack. However, it is still definitely worthwhile to go ahead and use the big abilities inside of ECB because all damage is good damage. But if you're just trying to kill something that has like maybe 30 to 40k HP or maybe 50k at most, like for example in ED1 on the first crystal I don't have my DS back, and so I just go ahead and use the 2 or 3 bleeds and a rapid fire on the first crystal with ECB active, and that thing melts very quickly. Deadshot's kind of the best example because it bleeds for a long time, it gets a lot of ECB damage out, and there's obviously, like mentioned before, there's going to be next clips out there where Zero's phase just gets absolutely nuked. Now that one's kind of a special case because Nex has some very strong damage caps on Zero's phase, and Deadshot kind of sits in that sweet spot, but it still drives the point home of how ECB works. Alrighty, now that I have rambled on long enough about abilities, arrows, and EoFs and whatnot, and how I use all of that, let's go ahead and actually talk about some ultimate rotations. So as far as a DS rotation goes on a normal range build with a crit setup, what I typically do is I will usually just try and YOLO a Gricko with my Death Spore arrows equipped, hoping to get the 5 stacks immediately, although that is kind of rare. And depending on where I'm at and how quickly I want to get these stacks, the more reliable way is just to use rapid fire into Gricko. That'll pretty much guarantee stacks, but it means that you're not going to have rapid fire as quickly inside of your DS. Although with the amount of Debo spam I do, I usually only get 1 rapid fire off in a Death Swift anyways. But regardless, once I have the Death Spore stacks built up, I go ahead and press Death Swiftness, and I immediately press Incendiary Shot afterwards. Now before Chinsend was nerfed, Incendiary Shot actually counted as a dot, where it actually couldn't be affected by crits or equilibrium or it couldn't be affected by anything. And so typically it actually was more worthwhile to use Incendiary Shot before your Death Swiftness. Although personally I liked having more of the crit timer inside of my ultimate than not, but this is kind of just a personal preference. If you have some examples later on of rotations that you find out work better for you by using Incendiary Shot into DS, feel free to leave that in the comments below. However, I pretty much have always just done DS into Incendiary, and the DS technically buffs Incendiary now because it is no longer a dot or damage over time. And then afterwards, I pretty much will just use a Piercing Shot, maybe a GDS or some other basic ability, and then go ahead and immediately hit SGB spec if it's applicable. If SGB isn't applicable, I usually just replace it with a Bow the Last Guardian spec and then start off my kind of ultimate rotation from there. But after an SGB, I will usually either hit Bow spec. I pretty much am just looking to see my stacks for Bow the Last Guardian at least 3 or greater, so that way when I hit the Bow spec, it puts 2 hits out. And then after that, I will usually immediately do a Gricko into a Tendies. The reason I do this is just to try and turbocharge all of my adrenaline up at once, because Gricko usually has a good chance of just sending you immediately to anywhere from 60 to 80% adrenaline. And Shadow Tendrils is a guaranteed crit by itself, and it's very strong damage. You're only going to do 1 in your ultimate rotation anyway, so you might as well get it out of the way early. And the second hit that it does still has a chance to crit, so hopefully you get some turbo adren. Then I will typically aim for 2 snapshots inside of my DS, the 1 Tendrils, a rapid fire, as many Debo specs as I can pump out using Piercing Shot to basically aid in that. Now that Piercing Shot does 2 stacks, you will hit Piercing Shot, you will see a 2 pop up in parentheses inside of your little bow spec buff, and then when you hit Debo, that counts as hit 3 and 4. That triggers the effect and gives you a 3rd hit, which I like to call triple Deboing. And should you get enough adrenaline return off of those 5 hits, you can then Piercing Shot again and go for another triple Debo. And it's kind of a loop that you can continue until you basically run out of adrenaline, and then you have Gricko to try and save you again. Snapshot obviously works in the same way because it's a 2 hit, so I will try and get that out usually after the tendrils, because Gricko will run through its 4 stacks immediately, get an extra hit on that 4th one, and then put you right at 3. And tendrils, being that it is a 1-hit ability, it will then be hit number 4, proc the effect, giving you a second tendrils. And so it lines you up nicely for a snapshot into a debo, or a snap or a piercing shot into a snap to get the snap doubled. There's a few things you can do here. There is a little bit of improv, but dependent on the adrenaline you have. But typically speaking, as a big picture, it is 2 snaps, a rapid fire, a tendrils, 2 SGBs if applicable. SGB spec is extremely strong, and you definitely should be trying to get 2 of those specs out for death swiftness. And piercing shot now just allows you to facilitate more triple dark bow specs. Now, if I don't have SGB spec available, well, that just means we have more time to spam debo. And so I typically will just immediately go for a bow spec and then go for a Gricko into a tendies. And even if you bow spec on 6 or 7 stacks that have already been built up, it'll immediately just trigger the effect and put you right back on 0, so you can do the whole Gricko into tendies deal. But anyways, I think that is enough rambling about the rotations itself. Let's go ahead and actually run some examples. Alrighty, we have everything loaded up. I'm just going to run through a couple different examples. We'll see if we get crits, we'll see if we don't. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, but I'm going to go ahead and do 2 DS rotations using SGB and then 2 DS rotations not using SGB. But anyways, let's just go ahead and get into it. We'll hit the CALG, so we are as crit buffed as we possibly can be. And I'll just hit Gricko to see what we get. We're already on 4, so I'll just go for the piercing shot. We got 5. Immediately into the DS, incendiary shot. Piercing into an SGB. And in here, I actually like to ECB spec, bow spec, and then to a Gricko. Hit the tendies. Piercing shot, and I'm going to go ahead and go into a snap and into a rapid fire. Piercing shot into a dark bow. Piercing shot into a dark bow, go for the Gricko. Maybe another bow spec. I'm looking at my timer here, so I'll hit piercing shot, an ability, and get my second SGB spec off. And that's pretty much it as far as a DS rotation is concerned. We'll go ahead and teleport back to Wars, refresh everything, reset, and do another. Alrighty, so here we go for the second Death Swift rotation with SGB. Make sure my ECB is on, Death Spore is re-equipped, we are CALG'd, Grim is on and good to go. Again, we'll hit Gricko. Got 3 stacks this time. Got lucky with the piercing shot, and we'll go ahead into a DS, into incendiary. A pop per usual. Pretty much immediately go for the SGB. Now, you will see a little bit more crit return from your SGB if you're actually using it on a proper target. But per usual, I'm just going to be using piercing shot here to help me get stacks. I'm at 100%, so I'm just going to go for a debo right now. Another piercing, hit another debo, hit a Gricko. Maybe a bow spec into a rapid. Hit the second SGB and just kind of go from there. It wasn't quite the best damage rotation, that one. However, you know, sometimes we get good damage, sometimes we don't. But now we're going to do a couple DS rotations without SGB. Alrighty, now we're just going to do a couple rotations without SGB usage. I'm just going to put my Death Spore back on per usual. Once again, make sure we're CALG'd up, Grimmed up, everything's good to go. And for Gricko, we got 3 stacks. I'll go for the piercing shot again. Didn't get it. Oh, then we did get the buff there, so we DS. Incendiary. And here, I'm going to go ahead and ECB into a bow spec, into a Gricko. And get the crits we wanted. By snipe, into a snap, into a rapid. I'm going to go for a second SGP, just kind of play around here, maybe into a dark bow. Into a Gricko, into a tendies. Piercing shot, dark bow. Piercing shot. Third ability, go for another bow spec. Gricko into a snapshot. And that's just kind of me playing around with a rotation, trying to get some decent damage out. We didn't get as extreme of a crit return as I was hoping for, but it is what it is. Sometimes you get crits, sometimes you don't. Alrighty, we have one more DS to run through here, so just like usual, we're going to make sure we're cowed, our Grim is turned on, and we're just going to go for it. Hit Gricko, got 3 stacks, hit Piercing Shot. Not getting quite the stacks we want here. There we go. Piercing Shot finally gave it. Hit DS, Incendiary, rinse, repeat. Do an ECB spec, into a bow spec. Gricko. Did not get any adren from that Gricko, which is kind of sad. So we'll snipe, and I'm just going to hit rapid fire early. Into a snapshot, dark bow, and Gricko, into attendees. Piercing Shot. Go for another dark bow, kind of YOLO this one. Maybe hit a third ability so that way Gricko puts us on 2. Didn't have the adren for another dark bow. So as you can see, sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. That's just kind of the way of the combat system right now. Sometimes you get big boy crit adren, sometimes you don't, and you just kind of got to play it by ear. Alrighty, hopefully you found that discussion in those example rotations and whatnot helpful for doing Bow of the Last Guardian damage. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave it down in the comment section below. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button for future guides and other content coming out on the channel. But anyways, I think that is enough rambling. Let's go ahead and roll that outro. Ladies, gentlemen, and I did not forget about you Pernix Quivers. Thank you very much for watching. Your viewership is greatly appreciated. Have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, nighttime, whatever it is, wherever you are, and I will see you next time for the next guide. Peace.